Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife discussion for you. We'll probably stray a little bit out of just knives, but I want to bring this discussion up, and I'll tell you why in a couple of minutes after I give you an introduction. But what I want to talk about is military style weapons, military style gear, and whether or not it belongs in the hands of civilians, or whether, and this is sort of what I'd like to argue, in reality that's more of a spectrum, and people are a little uninformed and frankly unfair when they talk about it. Okay, so the first question that I want to ask you guys to sort of introduce this, and I'd love to hear your comments down below, is what constitutes a military style weapon anyway? Are these military style folders? They certainly have that blacked out tactical look to them. And in fact, you may recall that I talked about becoming interested in the Recon 1 because I saw it on an episode of Ultimate Warrior, I think that's the right name, where they said the Navy SEALs carried a Cold Steel Recon 1. Now, I don't know how frequent that was or how much legitimacy to give that claim, but they certainly claimed it in the show. And so at the very least, this has been called, this has been claimed to be a military style weapon. All right, and of course we could add, but that, you know, if you say, yes, these are our military style weapons, you know, then what about something like this? All right, you know, because it doesn't have a black blade, is it not a military style weapon? Or what about something like this? You know, it's designed to be a very, you know, heavy traction plan, overbuilt, sort of hard use knife. And again, you go, you know, is that a military style weapon that civilians should be barred from having? And by the way, some knife companies do kind of think so, right? With some companies, you have to prove that you're a member of law enforcement or military in order to buy certain of their knives. And again, here's another example. What about something like this? You know, now, of course, you know, this is big. You got this big beefy blade and it's got tons of grip and, you know, it's really, really tough and all this. So is it a military style weapon? One other example here for you, and maybe I'll leave this guy in frame once we get him out. By the way, I do have my tactical operator gloves on for this video. You can see those mechanics gloves. By the way, if you're in Canada, TSC recently had, and they may still have it on a good sale on these, so you may want to go over and pick yourself up a pair. So what about this guy, okay? Is this a military style weapon, right? So, and by the way, I would say out of everything that I've shown you, this would be, you know, the most appropriate for use as a weapon, even though that's not the role that I put it in. And so this brings up another sort of element to this argument, and someone could look at this and go, hey, that is especially well suited to be a weapon. Maybe it should be banned, okay? And of course, if this knife, you know, maybe just this amount of green is enough. If this knife were in the UK, possibly it would be banned just because it's got that green liner under the micarta scales. So what's the story here? And how do we class this? By the way, I'll roll in a couple of pictures here. But, you know, an M14 or a Ruger Mini 14, are they military style weapons or are they hunting weapons? What about, you know, what about the Remington 700 rifle, which is, you know, is a base that's used for everything from hunting rifles all the way up to sniper rifles, okay? What about you know, let me tell you right now, I'll tell you one of the things that has got this on my mind recently. There was a radio story, I listened to it last week, and I actually called in about it, where the radio host was asking the question, apparently the police in Ottawa, you know, they had budgeted for and were upgrading their rifles that they carried in their cars. And what they were switching to was, I think, a C7, which is a very close equivalent to what the Canadian military carries, other than the fact that, you know, the C8 is fully automatic. And so she was making this huge thing out of the fact that the police were now carrying military style assault rifles. And I was like losing my mind every time she said it. So I called in and said, you know, first of all, the police all over the place for many, many years have always and already had an AR style, like an AR platform rifle in 223. So this is just an upgrade to what they already had. But she couldn't, she just did not want to hear that, right? To her, this was like a huge thing, and we're now militarizing our police and blah, blah, blah. And so, I guess I should have asked her, what rifle would you suggest they carry? Would you like them to carry I don't know, a Henry Big Boy or something? Like, I don't know what she was expecting there. So what about, firearms? And of course, if you're into guns, this is especially true of firearms. And she was making a big thing out of semi-automatics. And that was the other thing I said to her on the phone at that time is, the gun on the hip of every police officer is a semi-automatic. Like, I don't think you know what that means, right? And she had no idea. Okay, what is the story here? And first, if we first define this a little bit further to say, no, a military style weapon is something maybe a little bit different. So an assault rifle, I would call a full M16 fully automatic rifle. Sure, that would be a military use firearm. Same with a fully auto AK-47, but an AK-47 variant or an M16 variant that's semi-automatic and in fact designed not to fire, and they make changes to those designs so they can't even be easily switched to fully automatic. That does not qualify as a military style weapon, okay? Just because it looks black, okay? So let's pick on this knife for a second. Okay, this knife looks very black and, very plasticky and kind of modern and, has a lot of the features that people generally associate with being militaristic. Well, we have here a blade that is fairly thin behind the edge. It's a hollow grind, and it's thick enough that it's very tough. Well, is that something that a regular person needs or could use? Absolutely. The handle here is very grippy. It's got these deep finger choils in it. Why? Well, so that you have a really positive grip when you're using this knife. Is that something that is only important if you're using it to kill someone? No, it's important all the time. Doesn't matter what you're cutting, you want to be able to hold on to your knife, okay? And so to say that certain features make it military, now check out this pump shotgun right here. If you look at this, it looks like a hunting shotgun. And if you look at the next one, they're the same model, but I think most people would say, well, one is militaristic and the other isn't. Okay, let me switch out knives here for a second. What if you look at this knife? Well, it's all blacked out. Is it military style? Right? And probably some who are less informed would say, well, yeah, it probably is. Well, they would look at this knife and say, nah, that's not very militaristic. Okay, even though I would say this would be far more suited for a combat situation than the one I just showed you. All right, so let's throw a couple of knives back in here so you still got something to look at. So let's kind of move on just a little bit. So let's ask these questions. What do you suppose the military looks for in a tool that they're going to use? What kind of features? Do you think they look for durability? Do you think they look for weight, for ease of use? Okay. Ergonomics, the capabilities. Okay, there's a huge debate right over the 5.56 round, whether or not it is the best one. And of course, people who are in the military longer and are used to shooting a .308 caliber rifle say, yeah, that bullet is too small. Okay. And so now here's the question I want to ask you. So if you're looking for a gun that's comfortable to carry, that's easy to use, that's very durable, that's lightweight, that is easy to aim and easy to operate, and all those things are important for the military, I mean, which of those things as a civilian are you not looking for? Right? Do you go, well, I don't really need a gun that's easy to use. The more complex, the better. Well, no one says that. Okay. And things like pistol grips and adjustable buttstocks, those things make the gun more comfortable to use and more adjustable to individual users. So to say that those things should somehow not be allowed, and I know those exact things are, somehow not allowed in certain US states. And it's completely crazy because it's like saying that you shouldn't put leather seats in your car because it makes the car more comfortable. Somehow that makes it illegal. Well, you're still driving the same car and it's still doing the same thing. The leather seats don't fundamentally change it in any way and certainly don't change it enough to make it illegal. All right, now the other question I have for you, and this brings us back to weapons for sure. Brings us back to knives for sure. Are military weapons more dangerous than their civilian counterparts. Okay, so a knife like this, okay, it's got a sheath that it locks into very tightly. It's got a choil here. It's a little thicker blade stock. It's got a deep choil at the front here for this finger. It's got some jimping on the back. Is this knife more dangerous, okay, than your average kitchen knife, right? I would argue that it's not more dangerous in any sense. All right, it's made for a different application, but in no way is this more dangerous. And in fact, I would submit to you that more knife crime and more knife injuries occur with kitchen knives. So maybe it's the civilian stuff that's more dangerous, okay? Now the other question I have for you is, actually I'm gonna need that knife back in a second, but the other question I have, and this one specifically relates to knives, what about making automatics illegal for everyone except law enforcement? Right, let me look at this knife for an example. That's fairly quick, right? I can open up that knife fairly promptly if I need to. The same is true of this knife, right? I can open this fairly quickly. In fact, I know, and I have seen people demonstrate on video that there are non-assisted knives that open faster than assisted knives, and there are non-assisted knives that open faster than automatic knives. So, does somehow having a knife work with a button where I can just push a button and it opens? Does that make the knife somehow more dangerous, right? And let me demonstrate this for 1 second. Okay, so here I'm going to put two knives on the table here in front of you. And imagine that I want to attack you with one of these knives. Well, how's that going to go? Bang. I'm now ready to use this knife to assault someone if I were so inclined. On the other hand, I'm now ready to assault someone. So you can see, and this is going to be true of any knife that requires any action, right? The instant I pick this up, it's ready to be used. Okay, it doesn't matter how fast of an automatic knife, it doesn't matter if it's an out the side or out the front automatic, nothing is going to be as fast as this, right? It's literally always on, okay? And so to somehow differentiate that this knife, that an OTF is more dangerous than that is actually kind of silly, and certainly to suggest that only someone who is some kind of tactical, some kind of military personnel or law enforcement should have reason for an OTF or any automatic knife is kind of silly. And we can apply this in other areas as well, right? Is a hatchet or a tomahawk more dangerous, right? One is designed more toward a weapon, one is designed more toward a tool, but probably the hatchet is more dangerous because there's more weight there, and if you get hit with it, it's likely to bury itself much deeper into you than will the tomahawk, okay? Depending on, and I know there's a lot of variables there, guys. What about a rifle calibered in .270, right? A .270 is a really large round moving really, really fast. And you could argue that that's much more dangerous than a .223, especially at range. Now, we could even, there's another area that I really want to bring up here, and that is handguns. In Canada, it is only legal to use a handgun at a designated shooting range. Outside of there, you are not allowed to shoot a handgun, even though, okay, taking my 308 out and shooting it at a local farm is far more dangerous than if I took my 1911 out and shot it at a local farm. It is, because that 1911, that 45 bullet, after a few hundred yards, it's not going to do anything to anybody. But that 308, you could be 2 kilometers away and still cause damage. All right, now I don't know, maybe at some point out there it's going to start tumbling and be far less effective, but the point is still that there's nothing to suggest that just because a soldier or a police officer or some other branch of military or law enforcement uses something, that it's inherently more dangerous, okay? Now, I will say this, guys. There are things, and I know some of you want to take this to the extreme right away. What about a tank? What about a bazooka? What about a Scud missile? What about a nuclear bomb? I will say this about that. there are civilians who are licensed to use similar things to all of those. Okay, we live right near a nuclear power plant, totally run by civilians, right? Civilians in mining operations or various construction projects often use high explosives and plastic explosives for their work. And as long as you have the right licenses and take the right steps, it's completely legitimate to do that. Okay, and think about driving a car. All right, if you're going to argue that something being dangerous should mean it's illegal and it's taken away, guess what? In an average year, folding knives kill hardly anybody in Canada or the US, but cars kill hundreds of thousands of people all over the world all the time. What about alcohol? You could say, well, maybe I need my car. Yeah, maybe you need your car, but you certainly don't need a drink to survive. So you could say, maybe you probably don't need that folder to survive. Well, okay, that's fine. You don't need a drink to survive, but alcohol kills way more people even than guns, let alone knives. All right. And so the argument that just because something is dangerous, it should be taken away. I mean, what are you going to do? You'd have to take away belts and steel-toed boots and shovels and hatchets. And I mean, the list would just go on and on and on and on and on. Okay. And so I don't think it's legitimate to argue that just because something is dangerous, it should be taken away. And by the way, we don't do it in other areas. Right now, there's all this talk about legalizing hard drugs, okay, or I guess decriminalizing drugs like heroin and cocaine, which are inherently dangerous, okay? A gun or a knife, yeah, it can be dangerous to you if used improperly or used illegally, all right? But heroin, it is dangerous to you, period. Right? This knife, that can't be said about this knife. It's not dangerous to me if I'm careful with it and I'm responsible in its use. It's completely safe. The same is true of the guns that are locked in my gun safe right now. Are they of any danger to me? Nope, not in the least. Or nor anyone in my whole family who is, within a few feet of them at any given time. They're not dangerous to them at all. Not only are they rendered inoperable by a lock going through the action, but they're also inaccessible because they're locked in a safe. And so they're not harm to anyone. And yet, if I had a heroin needle in my house, yeah, that's a pretty scary thought. Okay, and so the difference, and so to argue that we should take anything that's dangerous away, not only is it something that is not sustainable because it would mean taking away all kinds of things, but it's not even something that we use in other areas. And in fact, we're arguing sort of against it in some cases. And so military style civilian weapons, guys, first we need to be clear about our terms, okay? What's a military style weapon and what's not one? What's an assault rifle and what's not one? Secondly, military innovation often has very legitimate uses outside of the military because the military needs a lot of the same stuff that civilians need. They need something reliable. They need something easy to use. They need something comfortable. They need something lightweight. Well, those are all things civilians are going to value in a firearm or a knife or anything else, a backpack for crying out loud. Okay? Military tools are not necessarily more useful than they're not necessarily more dangerous than other tools. They aren't, okay? Especially this is where we really get to the knife guys. This is especially true of OTF knives, right? What could possibly make an out-the-front knife more dangerous than any other knife that I've shown you here or any knife that you all have in your kitchen drawers at home? And the answer is nothing. In fact, it's probably... you could probably argue the other way, that the kitchen knives are the most dangerous, okay? And lastly, I would say this. Like, I have no problem with placing some kind of requirement on people to get trained, okay? Yeah, is it good to be trained before you drive a car? Sure it is. And I think it's equally good to be trained before you operate a firearm. I'm teaching my kids right now about knife safety. Now, knives are not quite as bad because you're less likely to do large amounts of damage compared to, say, a gun or a car. But you know, this is the way we handle most dangerous things in our society, right? The people who work at the nuclear power plant near me, yeah, that's a really, really dangerous thing to have nearby, but they're well trained, and so it's okay. The people who handle explosives for their jobs in construction or mining, yeah, that's extremely dangerous, but it's okay because they're well trained. And so making sure that we have competent civilians using those things, I think there should be no problem in that case. Hope you enjoyed the video. I would love to hear your comments below. This is one of those videos where I think it lends itself to a lot of discussion, and so I'd love to see that down in the comments below. We'll talk. Oh, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon.